It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill howling wind, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements.
In 1959, at the height of the Cold War, 9 Soviet university students set out on a hiking trip into Siberia's frozen wilderness. They never returned. For decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained an unsolved mystery deep in the Ural Mountains.
We say that this is possible, that such a slab avalanche would have injured them the way they were injured. Everything that happened after the avalanche is out of the scope of our.
Now, researchers Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin from EPFL and ETH Zurich in Switzerland have provided answers. The truth behind the tragedy is unsettling. The trip was meant to be a challenging but rewarding skiing expedition. The students, all experienced hikers at a Grade 2 level, aimed to reach Mount Otorten from the settlement of Vijay, about 300 kilometers away. Completing the journey would have earned them Grade 3 certification, the highest available in the Soviet Union at the time. However, none of them made it back. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led the group of 10. It included 8 men: Dyatlov, Yuri Doroshenko, Alexander Kolovatov, Yuri Krivonishenko, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin, and 2 women, Lyudmila Dubinina and Zinaida Kolmogorova. Their route, approved by the Sverdlovsk City Route Commission on January 8, 1959, was classified as Category 3, the most difficult. They chose to attempt it during one of the toughest times of the year. On January 23rd, they received their route book and left Sverdlovsk City. By the early hours of January 25th, they arrived in Ivdel, a town in the northern province of Sverdlovsk Oblast. From there, they took a truck to Vijay, the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. On January 28th, the group began their trek toward Mount Otorten. That day, Yuri Yudin, suffering from knee and joint pain due to his pre-existing health conditions, had to turn back. The remaining 9 continued the journey. The hikers documented their trip through diaries and photographs, making it possible to track their progress. By January 31st, they reached the edge of a highland area and prepared for the climb. The next day, they began moving through the pass. Their plan was to cross it and set up camp on the other side. However, the weather worsened. Snowstorms and poor visibility caused them to lose their way. Realizing they were lost, they decided to set up camp on a mountain slope and wait out the storm. That was the last activity recorded in their diaries and cameras, the only silent witnesses to what happened next. Before leaving, Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram to their sports club upon their return to Vijay. The message was expected by February 12th, but as their journey progressed, it became clear that their return would be delayed. On February 12th, there was no message from the group, but no one reacted since the estimated return date had been changed. However, concern grew on February 20th, when there was still no sign of the hikers. Their relatives insisted on a rescue operation, prompting the school authorities to send student volunteers and teachers to search for them. Days of searching yielded nothing, making it clear that something had gone terribly wrong. This led the families to escalate the matter to higher authorities, who launched a large-scale operation using every available resource, including aircraft. Soon, they made a disturbing discovery: the group's abandoned and heavily damaged tent. It was empty, partially collapsed, and covered in snow. Nearby, they found 9 sets of footprints leading away, left by individuals wearing only socks, a single shoe, or even walking barefoot. Following the trail, the searchers reached the edge of a nearby forest. Another 500 meters ahead, they found traces of a fire and a grim scene: the bodies of Krivonishenko and Doroshenko. Both were shoeless and dressed only in underwear. Near their bodies stood a large Siberian pine with broken branches reaching up to 5 meters high. This tree led the searchers to 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, who appeared to have died while trying to return to the tent. With 4 hikers still missing, the search continued until May 4th, when their bodies were found under 4 meters of snow in a ravine about 75 meters from the other victims. Unlike the earlier discoveries, 3 of them were better dressed, suggesting they had taken clothing from those who died before them. An initial medical examination found no significant injuries on 4 of the first 5 bodies, except for one who had a minor skull fracture. Hypothermia was considered the cause of death. However, this view changed after the 4 remaining bodies were examined. Thibaut Brignol had suffered major skull damage, while Dubinina and Zolotaryov had severe chest fractures. Notably, there were no external wounds linked to these fractures, indicating they had been subjected to extreme pressure. Experts stated that such injuries would require a force similar to that of a car crash. Beyond these fractures, Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, parts of her lips, facial tissue, and a fragment of skull bone. Zolotaryov had no eyeballs, and Alexander Kolovatov was found without his eyebrows. Investigators discovered that the group's tent had been ripped from the inside, and the victims had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. One of them had traces of radiation on his clothing, which raised further questions about what had happened. The case quickly gained attention and became known as the Dyatlov Pass incident, named after the group's leader. As investigations progressed, instead of clear answers, more theories emerged. Some suspected the indigenous Mansi people, who herd reindeer in the area, had attacked the hikers for trespassing. However, when questioned, the Mansi denied any involvement, and there was no evidence of a struggle. Only the hikers' footprints were found at the scene. Other reports mentioned strange orange spheres in the sky on the night of the incident, fueling speculation about nuclear testing or even alien activity. A blurry photograph taken by the group showed a tall figure behind a tree, which led to theories that they had been attacked by a creature resembling Bigfoot. In total, over 70 theories were proposed. Despite this, authorities concluded that the hikers had died of hypothermia due to extreme weather conditions. Over time, the case went cold, but the victims' families and the public continued to seek answers. Years later, scientists and researchers revisited the case, leading to new revelations. One possible explanation is katabatic wind, a rare and powerful type of wind, suggested by a Swedish-Russian expedition team. They pointed to a similar event in 1978 at Ural Mountain in Sweden, where 8 hikers died, and 1 was severely injured. According to this theory, a sudden katabatic wind would have forced the hikers to flee their tent and seek shelter behind the tree line. A flashlight found on top of the tent, left turned on, might have been intended to help them find their way back once the wind subsided. The team also suggested that the injuries sustained by 4 hikers could have resulted from a bivouac shelter collapsing. Another theory, presented in a book by Donnie Iyer, involves infrasound. According to this hypothesis, wind passing over the mountain could have created infrasound, which can cause panic attacks in humans. This could have led the hikers to flee their tent in distress. By the time they reached a lower altitude, they might have been out of the infrasound's range and regained their composure. However, in the darkness, they would have struggled to return to their tent. Iyer also suggested that the severe injuries suffered by 3 of the victims could have been caused by falling into a ravine and landing on rocks below. Another theory suggests that the campsite was in the path of a Soviet parachute mine exercise. According to this idea, the hikers were startled awake by loud explosions, fled their tent in a panic without shoes, and were unable to return for their supplies. Some members froze to death while trying to endure the bombardment, while others used their clothing before being fatally injured by additional parachute mine concussions. Many believed this explanation because there were records of parachute mines being tested in the area during that time. This theory also aligns with reports of glowing orbs seen in the sky, which were allegedly photographed by the hikers. Regarding the injuries found on the bodies, some have suggested that they were unnaturally manipulated. Others pointed out that photographs of the tent show it was set up incorrectly, something highly unlikely given the hikers' experience. Another theory suggests that radiological weapons were being tested, based on traces of radioactivity found on one piece of clothing. However, if this were the case, all the hikers would have been affected, not just one. The discoloration of skin and hair can likely be explained by mummification after prolonged exposure to the cold and air. Adding to the suspicion is the Soviet government's initial suppression of the case files, which many saw as a sign of a cover-up. However, withholding information about incidents like the Dyatlov Pass tragedy was standard practice in the USSR. By the late 1980s, all related files had been released. One widely dismissed explanation is that the hikers succumbed to hypothermia. The International Science Times noted that hypothermia can cause a condition known as paradoxical undressing, where victims remove their clothes due to a false sensation of intense heat. However, many argue against this, as some hikers appear to have taken clothing from their fallen friends, suggesting they were thinking clearly and not experiencing paradoxical undressing. Another possibility is that the group consumed hallucinogenic mushrooms, which are common in the Urals and known for causing intense hallucinations. Despite all these theories, the case remained unsolved for years until it was reopened in February 2019 due to public pressure for answers. However, this new investigation only considered 3 weather-related explanations. Before diving into that, let's take a look at the theory our subscribers found most convincing. This image illustrates just how close the hikers were to their destination, but tragically, they never made it there or back. For years, one question has remained: what really happened to them? After decades of uncertainty, scientists have finally uncovered the truth behind the Dyatlov Pass mystery, and the answer is disturbing. Further investigation into the case has revealed that something terrible happened to them, leaving no trace behind. What could it be? Let's find out. The reinvestigation ultimately led Russian authorities to conclude that a slab avalanche likely caused the deaths of the 9 hikers in 1959. A slab avalanche occurs when a compacted layer of snow breaks away from a deeper layer and moves downhill in large chunks. Although this theory had been suggested for years, many people remained skeptical. In 2021, 2 Swiss scientists published a study in Communications, Earth and Environment that provided a scientific explanation. Early objections to the avalanche theory included the low slope angle, lack of visible avalanche signs, uncertainty about what triggered it, and the unusual injuries of the victims. However, the study proposed that strong winds may have caused snow to accumulate on a slope near the hikers' campsite, leading to a slab avalanche. The study explained that a combination of uneven terrain, a cut made in the slope to pitch the tent, and snow accumulation from katabatic winds could have triggered the avalanche. The snow fell directly onto the tent while the hikers were sleeping, injuring some of them and forcing them to cut their way out. With no proper clothing, they were exposed to extreme conditions and couldn't survive, especially since they didn't want to abandon their injured companions. The avalanche theory also explains why the hikers fled into the freezing night with little to no clothing, and why they suffered severe but non-lethal injuries. To test this, the researchers created a simulation based on weather reports from that night. Since the hikers were lying down in their tent, a sudden impact from a slab of snow could have caused thorax and skull fractures without leaving typical avalanche signs. This explanation does not answer every question, such as why one hiker was missing her tongue, but it challenges many conspiracy theories. Some questioned how experienced hikers could have been caught off guard by an avalanche. Experts responded that while the group didn't place their tent in the safest location, their response followed standard procedures. Instead of staying near the tent and digging it out, they evacuated to lower ground, built a fire, and dug a snow shelter. Ironically, their survival instincts led them to an even worse situation. As for the missing tongue, experts believe it was likely due to scavenging animals, though this explanation remains debated. Since skepticism persisted, the families of the victims requested a review of the 2019 investigations. The Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation, ICRF, confirmed the avalanche theory and added key details. They verified that weather conditions on the night of the tragedy were extreme, with hurricane-force winds reaching 20 to 30 meters per second, a snowstorm, and temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees Celsius. When the case was first investigated, the authorities did not take the temperature into account, as they arrived at the site 3 weeks later when the weather had improved and the snow had settled. With these new details, it is now believed that the extreme weather played a significant role in the events of that tragic night, which have been reconstructed to support the avalanche theory. The sequence of events is as follows. The group reaches the mountain on February 1st and sets up a large 9-person tent on an open slope without any natural barriers like forests. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, and freezing temperatures persisted on that day and in the days prior. While traversing the slope and digging a tent site into the snow, they unknowingly weakened the snow base. During the night, the snowfield above the tent begins to shift slowly, under the weight of the fresh snowfall, pressing against the tent fabric, starting from the entrance. The group wakes up in a panic, with only some managing to put on warm clothing. With the entrance blocked, they cut a hole in the tent fabric and escape, descending the slope in search of a safer spot, stopping 1,500 meters away at the forest's edge. Since some members have little to no clothing, the group splits up. 2 of them, dressed only in their underwear and pajamas, make it to a Siberian pine tree near a fire pit. Their bodies, which were discovered first, were confirmed to have succumbed to hypothermia. 3 hikers, including Dyatlov, attempt to climb back to the tent, likely in search of sleeping bags. Though they are better dressed than those at the fire pit, their clothing is still inadequate for the conditions. Their bodies are later found at different points between the campfire and the tent, positioned in a way that suggests they collapsed from exhaustion while trying to navigate the deep snow and freezing temperatures. The remaining 4, who had warmer clothing and proper footwear, move further down the slope, likely in an effort to find or create a more secure shelter in the forest. Their bodies are discovered 77 meters from the fire pit, buried under several meters of snow, with injuries suggesting they fell into a snow hole that had formed above a stream. Investigators later concluded that the group's biggest mistake was splitting up instead of staying together to build a temporary camp in the forest to survive the night. They also pointed out that the original 1959 investigation contained oversights that left more questions than answers, fueling further speculation about the incident. Supporting the avalanche theory is a group of physicists and engineers who demonstrated how a small snow slab slide could damage a tent and cause injuries similar to those found on the hikers. However, this explanation is still not widely accepted. Many continue to hold on to their own theories, while some have even presented contradictory evidence, adding to the uncertainty. Skeptics argue that the location of the incident does not seem like an area where an avalanche could have occurred. An avalanche would have left behind specific patterns and scattered debris, none of which were found at the site. Additionally, The bodies that were discovered first were only covered by a thin layer of snow. If the avalanche had been as strong as experts suggested, it should have swept the bodies away, caused more severe injuries, and even damaged the tree line. Another argument highlights that other expeditions in the same region over the years have never reported conditions that could trigger an avalanche. This claim was supported by a study using advanced technology, which determined that the location was not likely to experience such an event. Further analysis of the terrain and slope suggested that even if an avalanche had occurred, its path would have missed the tent, which would have collapsed in a different manner, horizontally rather than from the side. There's also the fact that Dyatlov was an experienced skier, and Zolotaryov was on the verge of earning his master's degree in ski instruction. Given their expertise, they wouldn't have chosen to camp in an area at risk of an avalanche. Lastly, skeptics point to the footprints leading away from the tent. If the hikers had been fleeing in a panic, their footprints would have shown signs of rushing or running. Instead, the tracks suggest they were walking at a normal pace, which contradicts the idea of them escaping a life-threatening event. With all this in mind, what do you think really happened at Dyatlov Pass? A mystery that will never be solved, or one waiting for the right discovery? Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.